terms of challenges for leaders that are trying to do their best and implement more compassionate practices, what are you finding, Molly, are some of the common obstacles? What's a good approach for how they can overcome them?
An obstacle is always there just doesn't seem to be enough time. How
Yeah.
can I prioritize emotions and
Mhm.
kindness and operating from a place of compassion when everything seems like it's on fire? It's like we've
Yes.
got to find the hose and, like make sure that we've got everything addressed that seems to be falling apart in this moment. So how am I going to make time to develop myself and to show compassion and empathy, because it's just like all hands on deck all the time.
Yes.
And that's always going to be, from our experience, the challenge of how do we make time for it?
Mhm.
Well, the counter to that, or the answer to that,
Well,
is
hello and welcome. We are kicking off our second episode of our brand new Wellbeing Works interview series. Today, I have joining me a wonderful guest, Molly Phonpadith, and she is the CEO of Soar Community Network. She's actually a TEDx speaker, as well as an OWN Network team partner, and a certified talent optimization lead. Quite a mouthful there. So, Molly, tell our folks that are joining us today a little bit more about your background, both from a personal and professional level. I'm really curious to know the beginning origin story behind Soar Community Network, especially.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so delighted to be a part of this journey with you. Congratulations on launching your series. I am Molly Phonpadith, and like you were mentioning earlier about the origin story, I think about what inspired me to launch Soar, and I was thinking about just coming from Laos and being a child refugee of war. It led me to build a company eventually that lends itself to building a foundation of compassionate leader, comes from that experience. So when I was a little girl, I escaped my homeland of Laos with my family on a tiny little boat. And it was during the Vietnam era. And eventually we made our way to the refugee camps. And I remember my first real recollection and exposure to compassionate leadership was knowing and learning that one deciding vote from the board of directors at a local church in the United States of America was the deciding vote that led us to come to the States and allowed us this experience for me to, move from refugee to entrepreneurship. And it was that experience. As I became an adult, I was thinking about my whole life journey and how did I get here? Sometimes I pinch myself. I'm like, how did, growing up in poverty, coming here with nothing, and then being able to run a successful company that I'm really proud of, and I get to live my purpose through my business. It was because of all of those compassionate souls and compassionate leaders who saw something special in our family and in me. And not only were they empathetic, but they actually took it that extra step and took action to really help us and guide us and support us. So, when we think about the difference between empathy and compassion, compassion has that action piece to it, right? So you can feel for others through empathy, but until you act, that's where you practice compassion. And that's kind of like the origin story as to why we built a company and we created a framework called the C3 framework. And the first C being compassion. So it's really about at Soar, developing compassionate leaders at every level, regardless of title or roles, designing cohesive and high-performing teams, as well as fostering collaboration throughout the entire organization. So those are our 3 C's, and it starts with compassion.
Oh, so beautiful. And I did know a little bit more about your background, but tying it into how you're living your purpose and your mission today is even more meaningful. So thank you so much for sharing that, Molly. And I'm just curious in terms of, when you look at compassionate leadership and what that definition means, and again, you've experienced it firsthand, what would you say are some of the key traits among compassionate leaders?
As we have been doing this now for over a decade and working with and shaping and developing humans into becoming more compassionate. A lot of the folks we work with already have a desire and have a deep interest in leaving a legacy, in making an impact, in creating experiences not only for themselves but for others that are meaningful. And so they kind of have some of those things with them, a desire to grow and learn. But compassionate leadership is also, as we look at the folks that we know who really operate at that level where it's a daily thing, it's like it's now they've embodied what it means to be a compassionate leader. And what we often see is they are so good at listening. They're so good at being curious, asking questions. They don't immediately assign intention, even if they don't understand why someone's behaving a certain way. And maybe even in the moment, they're feeling a little uncomfortable about what's taking place. They don't go to that place of judgment or assigning intention first. They are calm, they reset, and then they get curious about, so tell me more about what you just said. Can you help me understand a little bit more about your perspective? Because what you shared with me kind of, it either shocked me or it made me pause. But they come from that space and that angle of real curiosity. And it's practice, right? Because we all humans react, especially when we're not in agreement or uncomfortable. So I would say some of those things are really key to compassionate leadership. But again, I'll come back to what I said earlier. A lot of us can feel for others, and a lot of us can be very interested in putting ourselves in another person's shoes, or kind of imagining their experience. But not many of us really take that next step, being intentional about putting action to those feelings. And that's where compassionate leaders really stand out. They do for others, right? They do those acts of kindness. They don't keep score of what I'm gifting or giving away. They are just trusting that what they're putting out there is doing some good for the people that they're serving, supporting. And I think those are probably the most important characteristics.
Fantastic. Yeah. There are also some, I would say, common misconceptions about compassionate leadership. And I'm just curious, is there anything that you recommend or see as ways that leaders can overcome some of those misconceptions? Especially you equate compassionate or compassion with kindness, gentleness, and yes, that's definitely part of it. But I'm also hearing the part you're highlighting, which is it's not only the ability to feel the empathy, but also take action and serve others, be there for others, give, and exude that kindness. But in some, especially in the business world, oftentimes there could be just some general misunderstandings or misconceptions. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more into that.
I love that question so much, because I remember when we first launched or when we first started to build out our framework, and we were sharing with some of our colleagues and even some of our clients. And some of them said, I love the framework, and I know that it has made a difference even in our organization. But are you sure you want to lead with the first C as compassion? Because not everybody will resonate with that in the way that you intend, right? They're just going to think, oh, is this another like soft woo-woo feel
Right. Yes.
that doesn't make a difference at all, that doesn't, really transform our culture in a meaningful way, that doesn't help us really focus on what matters, which is the bottom line? Does it help us really increase engagement? And can we so all of those things were definitely questions. Even our peers and our colleagues challenged us and say, are you sure? And I said, yes, because the world is ready for it. They may not necessarily think that they're ready for it, but our workforce is needing it and desiring it, and oftentimes demanding it. So even if the leaders themselves are not quite comfortable, what they're finding and what we can bring to the table with our research and with all the data now that's being collected over the last decade or more, especially around more of these essential skills, what used to be called soft skills, right? How essential they have become in making sure that the workforce, the humans that show up to serve your mission, is really being seen, heard, and valued, right? We talk about that a lot, but through operationalized compassionate experiences or ways to communicate in more empathetic, compassionate ways, those type of skills can be learned. And what happens when they are infused into the operations of the organization, the day-to-day activities of the organization, you do have a more cohesive, a more trusting, psychologically safe team culture. And so now that there's more data to support that this is no longer soft and woo-woo, this is essential to the future of workplaces, essential to the future of successful leaders being able to create that brand ambassadorship among your employee base, create the loyalty to stay with you longer, or to, even if they decide or find that there's something that they're pursuing that aligns more with their purpose, that they will still create a path that supports the organization instead of quitting on you, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that I think have made a difference. The misconception of it being soft, it feels good to the employees, but it doesn't really transform anything. It doesn't impact our business lines. It doesn't give us more customers or clients. That's all untrue, right? Those are all myths that we now, through the data, we can let people know that the more you infuse empathy and compassion in your practices, we'll see that exponential change and shift in attrition, turnover, right? Even well-being. I mean, this is what your podcast is all about. This is all about. Even the sick leaves and the calling out and taking time off, even being unpaid to do it because they are just so stressed and burnt out. So and I can go on and on, but those
no, you've said it very well, Molly. And it's like you said, it's just one of those things that it sounds almost too simple to be true, but really when you're looking at some of the workplaces that are not cohesive or are not really working very collaboratively together, that's what's missing. Those are these really tiny small acts of compassion, kindness, and just overall being a good human, really, and I think people just get involved in the work or the day-to-day or whatever the cultural programming that we've been brought up that, hey, you have to really focus on productivity, efficiency, and if it's not getting done and in this time or in this way, there just becomes this rigidity that's associated with everything they're doing. And they might not even realize that for whatever reason, out of habit or out of just that's the way they've been taught how to manage or how to do anything. They may not even realize that that's missing. But when you start to add these little bits of the compassion and just kindness and, like you said, being that good conscious leader and human, is when you start to see these incremental changes that compound. And like you said, now the data supports it's helping with retention, it helps reduce attrition, all these things, and even people's ability to be there and their desire to be there and their purpose in terms of how they're contributing to whatever workplace that is. So I'm glad we discussed that for sure. In terms of, this is a big one, and I am really curious to know what your thoughts are on this, which is how can a leader be both compassionate and still effective at holding their employees accountable? That's one I find that a lot of organizations struggle with. I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are on it.
I tell you, your questions are so right on. I love them. It's interesting because oftentimes we see being kind and compassionate and thoughtful as being on possibly the opposite end of the spectrum of accountability and making sure that you're managing your people in terms of the day-to-day operation to drive results. In the end, though, when you practice compassion and you can codify it and you can operationalize it, it lends itself to really being accountable by default. And what I mean by that is the more thoughtful you are about the roles and responsibilities, about the stress and the strain that it might be on the employee, on your staff member, knowing that, especially if you're utilizing behavioral science and doing those assessments, you can also identify when you're asking your team members, your employees, to flex outside of their nature, outside of their natural, like normal behavioral drivers, being able to really understand that and say and communicate effectively. I understand that I'm asking you to do something that's not necessarily like in your zone of genius. It's only temporary until the hiring freeze is done and we can bring somebody on. But at the same time, I need to hold you accountable because X, Y, and Z. You can be kind and thoughtful. In fact, the more kind and thoughtful and compassionate you are about the circumstances and communicate that, you will actually get to exercise accountability in a way that doesn't feel so forced. Like, oh, I got to be accountable, but I have to be kind, right? Exercising, practicing that compassion through your actions means that you don't have to really even check on yourself to see if you are making people accountable. Like they are doing the thing. And oh, I don't have to make you accountable because when you're in perspective, when they know you care about them. I know when I had leaders and managers who absolutely for sure cared about me, who asked about stuff that was happening at home, like when my father was sick with cancer and dying. I had managers who really just said, I can't believe you're here and I'm grateful you're here. I understand this must be such a hard time for you and I appreciate you. Those managers, even in the midst of my grief and pain and fear, I gave it my all. They never had to worry about any accountability sessions with me. It's the same for other humans.
Interesting. It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think that the stick, you got to do this, this, and this, that's going to get the results. But it's just that step back of what is it like to be in their shoes? What are they thinking? What could they be going through? How can I make it easy for them? And I love that. So thank you. That's awesome. And then in terms of, I know oftentimes there's the idea that leaders should be really modeling the kind of behavior that they want to see in their teams. And so in terms of modeling compassion and empathy to their employees, how can a leader do that, especially during difficult or particularly high stress situations?
Well, I always tell our clients who are executives or leaders in a management role that to make sure they're even doing the self-check, build it into the agenda. Like just build it into the agenda. When you have your meetings, whether it's your monthly meetings or your weekly meetings, carve out 5 or 10 minutes to just check in. Just get a pulse of how everyone's feeling, share with transparency, the stuff that as a leader or manager, especially during tough times or very stressful times, I'm experiencing this too, guys and gals. This weekend I'd had a hard time really like focusing because I know we have a big week ahead of us. Just like remind yourself that compassion is also self-compassion, right? Them that you are also sometimes stressed, that you mess up, right? Like we're not asking when you become or you're developing compassionate leaders, you're not asking them in terms of the coursework that they're just going to be compassionate all the time, always. This is really about mindfulness. This is making sure that as you experience life, as you go through work, even when you're stressed, you're bound to feel tired. You might get annoyed. You might stop there, right? You might lose your temper. But as long as you catch yourself, as long as you recognize, as long as you articulate that to the team, they know that you're human. We're not going for perfection. We're all perfectly imperfect people. But what we're going for is the recognition that there is a journey that we're taking to be better versions of ourselves at every chance we get. And if a manager and leader can show that and articulate that and share that on a consistent basis, then it gives everybody else permission to go on this messy journey too, because it's not clean and smooth.
Right.
Like, when you're stressed and you have to drive results and you have to build your business and have your team follow, whatever they need to do, roles and responsibilities, it's not going to be kumbaya all the time.
Right.
It's just not. And so setting those expectations, we're not going for perfection. We're not going for like meditating all day long and everybody's steady. What we're going for is more self-awareness, more self-compassion for yourself as a human, trying to do the very best you can with the circumstance and what you got, as well as being able to share empathy and compassion for others on your team.
Yeah.
That has to be part of your core values, if you will, the compass that drives how you as a team operates. And if you make that a central part of your day-to-day activities, including your meetings, build it in for 5 minutes to discuss, hey, are we treating each other with respect? Does everybody feel seen? Does everybody feel heard? That will make a big difference in how overall your employees feel about the culture of your organization.
I just love that question, even like pausing mid-meeting to say, does everybody feel seen, heard, and or understood? And that's great, because then even if it's not happening, it's raising the awareness level to then make a small change. So that's very, very great idea as well. And it's funny when you were saying meditating on the top of the mountain, it brought back, I don't know if you ever used to see this little cartoon series called the Animaniacs. I don't know if you ever did, but there was this one little character who, when he'd get stressed out, he would close his eyes and, be in a lotus posture, meditating, and go, llama, 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 llama. And it was crack me up. And I just remember with our girls, when we would just try to keep them calm, we would kiddingly share that with them. So sometimes they come and they make fun of it and say llama, llama when they get stressed out. So anyway, sorry, I just brought that memory back.
What that made me think of, though, is I think with, especially with the clients that we have now, we always tell our leaders, our managers and executives, you have to create space for folks to actually refuel. So even in the middle of the day. So for me, I have certain modalities and practices that help me. So I will pause if I have meetings back to back. I'll first of all put on my calendar to some buffer time, because I need that. And then in our building here, there are moments when I just make loops, like meditative walking, loops around the floor, about 5 loops. And those are the types of things that should be okay in the environment for managers to say, you know what, find the thing that allows you to refuel and bring you back to center, and then go for it, right? Take the need. If you need to go outside when it's warm, you should walk around the building. I'm not going to check in on you. If you need that time to refuel to get the job done, that's also a way for you to show how you're being compassionate with your members, with your employees.
Yeah. And is that something that you just have your leaders give as both, hey, this is something you can do, and then model it? Or is it something that they actually say, hey, put this on your calendar? Or what does that look like? Because again, I just feel like if people aren't used to that, even if a leader says it and maybe they do it once, it's not going to happen, or they may do it once, and then if a coworker calls them out on it or something, and they get pulled back in. It's just that kind of, I love the idea of it, but I'm just curious if there's any practical practices that you find are more effective in terms of doing that.
Yeah, I would say, different teams or organizations have their unique culture. And so it's going to be obviously, it depends. But we've had situations where in the beginning, it is modeled. So the manager or the executive will actually take these 10, 15-minute walks with the team. Like, just have everybody practice it in the beginning, right? So, hey, we're going to have a walking meeting, right? It's at noon. We're going to go around 15 minutes, we'll do a walking meeting. They just walk together just to make sure that everybody is in a new way of still be productive. But we all have to get up from our seats, because we've been at the computer for 3 hours And so let's have a walking meeting. We also
Oh, yeah.
we used to have a friend who was a physical trainer, and he would get hired a lot by executives who would then come in and start their morning meetings with having him come in and do stretches and exercises with everybody. So
Yeah.
there are organizational leaders who get that you have to have some of these interesting new practices and
Yes.
to kind of balance out the stress level of just being on the computer working or
Right.
sitting all day if you happen to be in a frontline worker, and
Mhm.
giving you space to do something differently that will allow you to breathe, stretch, take care of the whole person.
Right.
Also, opportunities where a manager and executive will say, okay, these are things that work best for me. Like for me to refuel during my lunch, I take half hour of lunch and then I pull out my guitar for the next half hour and I play my music. So
Mhm.
they ask their employees, tell me what is it that you like to do for your 15 minutes or half hour, and we'll leave you alone. Like if you're taking your 15-minute break, right,
Right.
to refuel in the middle of the day. I had one, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, had an understanding that there are 3 members on the team. It was a small team, it was like team of 12 people. 3 members on the team said, hey, for me to refuel, I need like a 15-minute cat nap. And they're like, fine, we have a focus room.
Right.
There's space to do that.
Perfect.
There's no
Yeah.
big.
Yeah. And like you said, it's going to depend on each organization. So I know with a lot of the clients I work with, it's more we brainstorm together different ideas and then focus on one or two, and then we experiment. And then we, see what worked, what didn't, and keep tweaking. And then I think it's just knowing that anytime you're going to implement even small changes, give yourself that space, that grace to fully experiment and fail. And it's okay. And then what are you learning? What can you do differently? But it's all, for the sake of creating that much more healthier workplace. So like great ideas. And I'm glad we're riffing on all this. So in terms of speaking to the connection between compassion and resilience in the workplace, how can leaders promote resilience among employees or their teams?
Resilience is such a complex topic. And at the same time, resilience really is about gifting people the opportunity to express themselves, to express their frustration, to be able to have a community, team members, and even if you assign like a duo, in the team where they have someone they can go to kind of just talk through some of these things. Being resilient does take not just yourself, like it does. So certain people are intrinsically motivated, and that's fine, right? Some people can just figure out a way with their own intrinsic motivations to push through, break through, and be okay. Other folks, though, are going to need some extrinsic motivations to help them, to reassure them, to encourage them to
Mhm.
continue forward when things get tough. And
Yeah.
so we can't assume that all humans are the same and that they're just going to have to like grind it out on their own and figure it out and push through it and fight through it. I mean, get some grit. Or it's great, and I love when I hear people who can do that and can do that intrinsically, but not everybody's built that way. And so I
Mhm.
think managers and leaders have to understand that when you're trying to encourage, inspire, and motivate more resilience in your people, it has to start with you being able to really see them and understand what they need, what tools and resources, emotional and otherwise, support that
Mhm.
they need in order for them to actually show up and behave and walk through difficult situations and times within the organization to then come out more and more resilient, right? And
Absolutely.
just you don't just get born into the world being resilient. Like life
Right.
teaches you the practices, and sometimes you get it right and you can push through certain situations. Other times you fail miserably, and
Yeah.
so you can't expect all employees to just go and be resilient. And everybody has to figure out a way on their own. Yes, but
Right.
the more that you can provide them with the resources that they need,
Mhm.
understanding them individually, it makes a big difference, right? Everybody has their own path and their own timing. When you need folks to be resilient, first of all, you need to help them understand what that actually means. Like, what expectations are you setting? You
Mhm.
know, is resilient. Well, I come to work every day. I could just stay home and do nothing. That's resilient.
Hmm.
I have a point, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the resilient means innovating and creating at a time when it just seems like there's an impossible hurdle for us as a company or as a team. Then that's when you have to give them tools and resources where the community can come together and they can then become resilient together. So, I mean, that's what I've seen, especially with COVID and everything that's happened over the past few years. Uh, Having someone be more resilient, we have to help them.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just expect people to figure out how to be resilient, especially when we've never, at least in our generation, experienced something like COVID as a collective.
Right.
I think that's important for leaders to set their expectations, define what they mean, have one-on-ones with their team members, their employees, and just get a sense of where everybody is and not expect everybody to operate the same way,
Mm-hmm.
show their resilience.
Yeah. And I think it's also important for leaders to share a little bit of vulnerability, only because it's something that shows their own humanity, and that, hey, they struggle too, and that it's okay if you don't have it figured out. And here, let me help understand what's happening with you, with another employee or a client, whatever the case is, and then how can I best support you with that. So I think that that's really important. And a lot of the other pieces of, I think, resilience are more the inner game and the mindset in terms of how they're viewing situations, how they're viewing even your everyday interactions that happen, and how those are interpreted. Now, I'm wearing my coaching hat, so I'm thinking in terms of the kinds of clients that we coach on that level. A lot of it comes down to, what is the self-talk? What are the thoughts that they're entertaining and giving their focus and their attention to? And if it's on the negative side, that is not in the building resilience category. But it's okay to have some of those. Again, we're all human, so we're going to have some of those, but it's a matter of getting back into that grounded center, as we talked about the Lama, or just taking the self check-in first, and then from there operating, like knowing your own boundaries. If it's too emotional, you might not even half an hour might not be enough. It might be something you sleep on and you come back and you address, and maybe not when you're in the heat of the moment, but you look at what would be some other thoughts that would be more serving to me. So a lot of times it's, I didn't do this right, or beating themselves up, the lack of self-compassion, as you pointed out before. And then, giving that its space, but then saying, what would be better thoughts that could serve me? And starting just from there. It might be a process where it's just recognizing it first and then pausing, and that's all you do. But then as you get better and better at it each time, like, all right, this is maybe like the 6th or 7th time I've done that. Now with the new ideas of the positive thoughts of, I got this, I can do hard things, whatever that looks like. Start with one of those and layer it, and then just keep going, because it's a process, because we're used to all that. But anyway,
no, I was going to say that it's definitely a process. You said it right when you said practicing resilience, and it really, every time you're challenged with some situation, it's a new situation, you have to practice your resilience. It's not like you wake up and you're resilient. You have to do the thing every day, and then you build up your muscle, and eventually you come out of that situation looking back and saying, wow, I was resilient. But you don't show up the next day, say I'm resilient, you practice it. And I think you're right. When a leader and a manager shows up and says, I'm practicing with you, like we're figuring this out together. Right. It is so empowering to know that you're not expecting me to know exactly what to do and how to be resilient, because this is the first time we're challenged with this, right? And so that modeling, that showing up and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't know either. I'm just doing the very best I can right now, and tomorrow we'll get better together. I think that's the key to resiliency in the workplace especially, right? Like that everybody understands it's a mindset and it's a practice, it's a process. And we're figuring it out together.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then in terms of challenges for leaders that are trying to do their best and implement more compassionate practices, what are you finding, Molly, are some of the common obstacles? What's a good approach for how they can overcome them?
An obstacle is always there just doesn't seem to be enough time.
Mm,
How
yeah.
can I prioritize emotions and
Mhm.
kindness and operating from a place of compassion when everything seems like it's on fire? It's like we've
Yes.
got to find the hose and, like make sure that we've got everything addressed that seems to be falling apart in this moment. And so how am I going to make time to develop myself and to show compassion and empathy, because it's just like all hands on deck all the time.
Yes.
And that's always going to be, from our experience, the challenge of how do we make time for it?
Mhm.
Well, the counter to that, or the answer to that, is making it a part of your practices, codifying it. Doesn't mean that over time you have to carve out extra time for it. It's embedded into the way in which you work, the way
Sure.
that you communicate, through your meetings, through your
Mhm.
onboarding. It's all embedded, it's all codified throughout.
Yes.
So in the beginning, of course, there's
Sure.
work, investment, financially, human capital, all of that.
Right.
The goal is to build it where it becomes so embedded into your ecosystem, just becomes a part of your being, a part of your operations, that it's not like you're feeling that extra need to carve out extra time to just treat people better. You're just automatically doing it through initial training, through reinforced learning groups or discussion groups to build up the muscle and the habit of what it feels like and means to be and operate from a place of compassion. So, of course, there's always investment, whether it's time or whether it's money, to change habits,
Mhm.
to change systems. But then once you put everything in place and you have tested it, just like you were talking about, right? Tested it, make sure it works for your ecosystem, for your culture, then it becomes so much more effective and efficient over time. It just becomes the way of being. It almost eventually becomes the philosophy of your organization. The heavy lift is in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's great. No, and I like how you broke that down in terms of, it's something that's interweaved, but obviously the upfront work is required and needed, but really well worth it, that now you have a much more happier, just very well working and well-oiled team, and one that, they're still human. Mistakes are going to happen. People are going to there's still going to be some conflict, I'm sure, but how you handle it, how you come out on the other side, and what you learn from it, that's what's important, and that you keep building upon that. So that's really important to know that. In terms of, fostering a culture of kindness and passion, as well as maybe even looking at opportunities to make team members feel valued and appreciated, are there any particular things or best practices you're finding among your clients that really, I guess, capture that spirit of the compassionate leader and the kindness that we, really want to strive for?
I think the best advice I can give is, don't assume you know what your employees and your workforce wants or needs or desires. Ask them.
Mm, yeah.
Ask them. Have your one-on-one interviews, send out those surveys, but don't just send out the surveys, customize your surveys, right? You know your culture better than any outside consultant will. So even if you bring a consultant in, and make sure that you're able to, with the consultant, create not just your standard survey questions, but embed a few in there that is unique and specific to your organizational values, to the way in which you operate. That's going to be really meaningful, because, I mean, how many surveys can you do in a year as an employee and feel like there's going to be real,
Mm,
actually going to take
Mhm.
a minute. But when you
Right.
take time to really customize the survey, and then you roll out really strong, powerful communication plan and messaging around why we're capturing your feedback and your
Mm-hmm.
comments, and also an action plan that promises them or commits to them that, once you take the assessment or get the results, we're going to do X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
Oftentimes they don't even know what you're going to do with the
Right. Right.
so they're not really fully engaged in the process of even answering the survey.
That makes sense.
So ask them what they need, desire, want. What are the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, right? In terms of overall culture, but also
Mhm.
technical skills. So it's not just about the soft skills or the emotional part of
Right.
action, but it's also what do they need to get their jobs done in a
Mhm.
more effective way, in a more, underscore this, meaningful way. Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if you can align their roles and responsibilities to what really matters and what motivates them personally, oh my gosh, that's the secret sauce to real engagement
Mhm.
and overall improving the employee's experience. Align the thing that they're doing to what matters to them personally. And
Mm.
it's like a magic formula.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with everyone. And then in terms of leaders prioritizing their own health and well-being, really that work-life balance piece. Um, how how can leaders prioritize that and be a great model for the rest of their team on that subject?
First and foremost, self-awareness. Understand why you're feeling what you're feeling. Be able to identify your emotions. Is it stress? And if it is stress, what's causing the stress? Is it your people? Is it the work itself? Is it other things outside of work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's impacting your stress. You have to be aware of what your needs are
Mm-hmm.
before you can fix it or invest in your health and wellness. You might be in the best shape physically, right? Because you're eating well, you're going to the gym, but you're not in your best shape emotionally. You still feel a
Mm-hmm.
sense of something's missing or longing.
Right.
So maybe you're going to the gym and that makes you feel great, but you haven't really done any healing work for the deeper stuff, maybe that you've had in your younger years and some trauma or some pain that you're holding on to.
Right.
And so I think the self-awareness piece of taking the time to uncover what your real needs are based on the emotions and based on the impact and how you are defining your stress. Or is it not even a stress, but it's a longing? Is it a longing? Do I feel like here in this organization, there's no sense of belonging? And so
Mm.
you gotta identify what you need first before you start looking for resources or investing money.
Right.
I'd say this, if you're seeking or you find that you need counseling or, therapy,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just go to a therapist and, like not have awareness of what's wrong because
Right.
they
Right.
can't
Not
provide
going
you
to help you. Right. Uh-huh.
practices or
Yeah.
modalities that can support you. So, I mean, there's so many answers that I could give,
Yeah.
but
Oh, for
for
sure.
self-awareness, take the time to understand what is causing the
Mm-hmm.
imbalance, if you will,
Yeah.
and that will help to really pinpoint where you should prioritize and start your wellness journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a good one because it might not be what you think it is. And once you have a better idea, that's going to help you zero in on where you need to maybe make a few adjustments. And I do encourage folks, if they're not sure, definitely chat with mental health professional, like Molly said about whether it's a therapist, if you think it's more past related healing issues that are underlying causing more stress, or if it's present day issues, talk to a good friend, a colleague, someone who's trusted, or even a coach, because their job is to give you that perspective. And in a way that's still very supportive, but really different than your friends and family without that lens of how they know you. So I think that's really important to seek outside assistance once you have an idea, and you don't have to pinpoint it exactly. Even if you know sort of where it is, where the realm of it is, that's enough to start, and then someone else can help you pinpoint that. So I think that's a great piece of advice. So thank you for that.
That does start with that self-awareness piece and identifying what you need. We have leaders and executives who don't necessarily need a mental health expert, but they definitely need a coach. You know,
Yes.
they just need to get support and understanding how to navigate, how to better their communications or shift their mindset. So it doesn't even have to be at the level where you need to seek that that mental health expert, but really you identify something that's holding you back, especially in the workplace. Start with the coach first, because it could be just that you're feeling alone, and you're operating at this level. As you move up the ladder, becomes more and more lonely.
It
So
does.
it's
does.
to have someone you can bounce ideas off of, someone to coach you and guide you through. So good point, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I find that clients love that, hey, especially those that are in the nonprofit space that are in an ED executive director level, they have their board and then they have their staff. They may have a spouse who might be tired of hearing them as a broken record, but what an outside perspective, like someone from a coach, can give them is not only a sounding board, but just relief to be able to vent things out and talk things through, and have a completely different view on it. So yeah, it's I get that a lot. Some of the clients are like, oh, I feel so much better after just being able to get it out, and then see that, hey, the stuff going on in my head, it's not all, how would I say it? I don't want to use the wrong words here, but it's not it's very convoluted and confusing when they're in it, but it's so much clearer when they get it out. Yeah. So anyway, no, definitely. Yeah. And then you mentioned communication being key, and that is a real big one. Yeah. So what are some ways that leaders can encourage open and honest communication within their teams, among their employees and staff? And I think it's critical to well-being, but if you want to speak to why you're finding that is critical for your clients in terms of well-being, it's something I think that definitely needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I would say, don't make it ad hoc. Build it.
Okay.
Be very intentional about your approach to sharing your emotions and ideas. It is important when you are creating that psychological safety among your team members within your team, that you are sharing with them that it's a mindful and intentional part of your operations and plan. So I would say, don't assume that what you're doing is understood by all.
Yes.
So know that a part of you growing together as a team to become better together, to design more cohesion, to foster collaboration, is to start from a place of active listening, a place of empathy that transfers into compassion. And that if you let your team members understand that this is the new model of how you're going to operate, then you now have to commit to that. And every opportunity you get, including your meetings when you want to talk about quotas, is to build in those few minutes on the agenda of checking in. Just as I mentioned earlier in the interview, it is powerful when you send out an agenda and the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes is checking in, right? Or segue or updates on anything that is cool that you want to recognize, shout out. Something that's not so rooted in the actual day-to-day operations, but rather, how is my team feeling? Are you all happy? Are you all doing well? Are you excited about this week? Those are the things that you just build in, and make sure that you keep it locked in so they expect it, and that you're keeping your promises to make sure that they're feeling seen and heard every time, not just when you do a number.
Oh, I love that. Such gold. So those of you paying attention, I mean, it's tough. And I think the biggest challenge I'm seeing is really the assumption that don't they know? And so I feel like for that piece of it, is there anything from a practical standpoint? I mean, other than over communicate, right? It's almost like they should know, or we've talked about this before. And it's really easy because, like you said, the biggest other challenge is the time, right? And prioritizing what to focus on. So is there anything other than over communication in general? And I love the pause, whether it's first 5 minutes, last 5 minutes, or the between the segue. Beautiful. And I think that should be something that, you try at a meeting or two and then see how it goes and keep going with that. But anything in terms of addressing the assumption part, because I think that that's so, it's almost again habit of that's how the organization was built. That's how they've always done it. And you can't blame any leaders for operating from there, but are there any practical tools to get them out of the assumption mode?
Mm-hmm. It's almost silly because it seems so obvious.
Yeah.
But just through our experience, we've learned that it really comes down to just ask them. It's so simple.
Yeah.
It doesn't get done that often because, again, we build out our agenda because we have so much to do, right? But we don't put on the agenda, just ask them. So oftentimes the language would be toward the end of the meeting, whether it's a one-on-one meeting or with the team, is, am I missing anything?
Okay.
Something that I may not have captured that, or we may not have addressed or came up during this session that we should be noting for the next meeting or being mindful of. And that's it. Just ask them so that you don't assume that everybody in the room is in agreement with what just happened.
Right.
You can say, hey, did we forget anything? Or did we not address something that we should be thinking about, right? So that's just overall in terms of the work to be done. But there's also an opportunity, and I know this is not feasible for every organization just because the size of your team might matter. So if you're a leader, manager, and you have staff that reports up to you, if you can't do it on a monthly basis, on a staggering quarterly basis, you need to have your one-on-ones with each of your staff members, and especially in the business units, right? Because if you're a CEO and you have 200 employees, or 500 or 1,000, that's not going to be feasible. But for the leaders and managers, when you're operating from the place of compassion and empathy, and at the same time, accountability, drive those results, you want to create an opportunity where you basically have an open door policy. Every 3 months, or maybe every 2 months, you have to sit down with that one employee, and doesn't have to be about work. Is there something going on in your life that's making it exciting? Are there might be people who are going to school at night trying to get some type of technical degree, or they love yoga and they want to become a yoga instructor. And, like the managers don't know anything about that, right? And so just give the opportunity for people to feel like, hey, I'm meeting with my manager every quarter and I get to just talk about anything.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be about the job, just anything. And you can build into the agenda, what's great in your life. What are some of the challenges if you want to share, and you don't have to, right? Like psychological safeties, they don't have to, they can volunteer.
Exactly.
And then how can I, as your manager, or possibly the team and the organization, based on the resources, how can we support you? Because that personal journey is so sacred and meaningful to how they show up to work. If you're helping them, if you're making them introductions to things that matter to them outside of work, when they come to work and they are fulfilled in all the other areas of their lives, they're going to just show up and shine and support and really engage. So it's an opportunity for you to kind of like straddle that line. Of course, you're always going to be their manager, supervisor.
Right.
You can show some care.
Yes.
You know, you can show some care, and you can also build an opportunity to show support from the needs outside of their roles and responsibilities. Those are some little things that you could realistically do to make sure that every employee feels valued and feels that you appreciate them.
Absolutely.
The whole human, not just
Right.
that comes to work.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what actually I'm doing with one of my clients right now. She's doing quarterly meetings, the one-on-ones. They're small enough to be able to do that, but that's exactly the whole idea of building in more care so that the trust and the psychological safety is a natural thing that happens. And I think the other thing that you had mentioned earlier, I just wanted to emphasize, was just the asking part. I love that, because so many times, people are in attendance physically at the meeting, but who knows if they're actually present and paying attention. So the leader may have said something like 3 or 5 times at several different meetings, but if they're not getting it, just that question captures any potential misunderstandings, or maybe something someone saw that with the process could either be improved or someone didn't think about. So I just love that, the just ask part, because it keeps the communication and the conversation going 2 ways, and it's just building more rapport, more trust, and that it's just going to keep going again on top of one another. And I think that that's just important to make sure I pointed that out. So I love that. Thank you. In terms of, especially if you have an organization that maybe is on the larger side, and they need to get folks in higher level leadership positions, their buy-in or what have you. So is there any particular advice you would give either change makers or leaders in those spaces that are struggling to create a more compassionate workplace, and they're facing some kind of resistance or pushback from other stakeholders? And it could be a small one, and then it's the board or something else, but just anything in terms of that kind of resistance and how they can address that.
For us, the strategy that works really well at Soar is providing with the data that they're seeking. Hard, to convince any executive at the top to find money because there's just so much that the organization needs to grow, right, and to sustain itself. And it's just hard to find budget and moving things around to do it. But when you start to collect the data, first of all, getting a pulse and gauge where the employees are feeling anyway, you can actually have these diagnosed scores, and the scores will tell you where you're actually suffering the most. And if people are saying that they're suffering from belonging, they don't feel that people are, they feel alone in the organization, then we know we have to address that. If the reports or the insights come back and it says that they don't feel they have enough resources in terms of technical skills to get the job done, then we know that the allocation of resources and money has to go to some of those things. But if everyone comes back and says that, my mental health is suffering, I'm experiencing burnout, we don't have clarity, we don't have the best relationship with our manager because our manager doesn't really listen to us, then that's where we can actually show them the data, or some of the compassionate leadership training, or some of the programs that we have to really create that inclusion, that belonging, that compassion, that kindness. If we show them the data, not just the survey scores, but also that align it with how many people have left my team or this division in the past 6 months, how many people have called out sick, right? So we collect all of that information, and then we calculate what it's costing us for people to be calling out sick. It's costing us for people to quit and then leave us or go on early retirement, like in most government agencies are often challenged with. We calculate all of that out. Then we propose what it would cost to run an entire year's program on unconscious bias training or compassionate, inclusive leadership, whatever it might be. Show them the numbers, and it's going to make so much sense to realize that hiring someone to come in and build out a year's worth of program with reinforced learning through the years versus
Right.
with even 3 employees,
Yeah.
it's just like a no-brainer. But
Yes.
you have to show them the data.
Okay. Perfect. That was actually my other question. So you answered it already about the metrics in terms of what to measure in terms of compassionate workplace. Anything else you want to add to that? I think you covered it, but
No, I think you're right. I think it's also prioritizing at the highest level of the organization, whether it's a nonprofit and pitching this to the board,
yeah.
is really looking at things like attrition, looking at, how engaged are people,
Yes.
what goals have not been met, what strategic objectives keep being pushed off because people are not operating at their highest level of efficiency, effectiveness, productivity. And they will quickly realize that people strategy, that attention to care and what they need is causing a lot of the organizations to bleed out, if you will, money.
Gotcha. Yes. Beautifully said. Final main question I had for you, Molly, which is, what advice would you give someone in a leadership or change maker role, like an influential type of role, that wants to actually build a more compassionate workplace? And you've given us a ton. So if there's any, maybe it's more final, other additional things or insights you want to share.
Yeah, I think it's important to really define what you desire out of the culture or the team dynamics you want. So going through a mapping process to even map out the ideal culture of your team or of your company as a whole is something that people don't invest the time in doing. They absolutely invest the time in building out a strategic plan,
right?
A plan, but part of that should be also mapping out what an ideal culture they desire, because it's going to be different for every organization, industry, etc. And so allowing yourself to think through, what does the culture look and feel like? What are the employees saying about the culture or the team dynamics? Ideally, what do we want? From there, you kind of create that North Star of this ideal culture or ecosystem. And then you work backwards and figuring out, well, how do we get there? What is going to take for us to hear from our employees that, this is the first place in their entire career that they can't imagine leaving voluntarily. Right?
Yes.
Right. So those are the types of things you map out. And then you also get a chance to co-create that with your employees.
Yes.
So have them share with you, hey, if this was the dream place to work, and we can create or provide resources that would, there would be no competition. You would never have to send your resume out. What would you want to see?
Yes.
And then the sheer fact of you asking them to co-create that with you sends just a powerful message of your willingness and your deep commitment to shaping an organization that is powerful, empowering, meaningful, and healthy. Find such an extravagant word, but
yes. Yeah, and I love that's just beautifully said, because just the idea of asking them to be, for their input, to be part of creating what that looks like to them, because it is, as you mentioned, co-creative. And so I just love that you pointed out that that's just, that gesture in of itself is so powerful, not to mention the actual work you'll be doing to get there. And it's interesting because my very first guest, Mike Moss from SCUP, he and I dove into how he went, like he's where they are now, of a place where people don't want to leave, right? And it's all these questions and ways we talk through of how he got there. But it was a process. I mean, it took them like about 5 years to get to where they're at. But it's that starting with the end in mind, as you pointed out, and getting that feedback on the front end and throughout the entire process that I think really made it a success. So encourage folks to, if you haven't had a chance to, definitely check that out as well. And then Molly's giving us a great perspective from her, what she does at Soar Community Network in all of her clients and how they serve and all the different inner workings and so many different insights. So thank you for that, Molly. And I also wanted to just ask, where, with all these wonderful pieces of information and wisdom, where can people find you, Molly?
Well, I am on social media. So LinkedIn, you can just type my name there. I don't think there's any other Mali Phonpadith in LinkedIn, so that's easy to find. You can also just Google my name. Our website is Soar, SOAR, communitynetwork.com. Those are going to be the best ways to reach me. And one final thought I wanted to share. Culture transformation, the word transformation means that it's an ongoing, ever-evolving process. You don't transform a culture in 1 month, 3 months, 3 years. Culture transformation is a process. It happens daily, every day, forever.
Yes.
That's one thing that we want to make sure people understand. Hiring someone from the outside or trying to do it internally to transform your culture, it's not like an end date that you should be focused on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's monitoring and tracking and seeing how things have improved and continue to improve. That is culture transformation.
Yes.
Right?
And it's a mark of a good leader, and one, like you had mentioned earlier, is always on the learning and the development side. So it's, again, and it's for all of us. It's about life in general. I mean, we're all kind of in that boat of constantly tweaking, constantly learning, but that's what it's about. And if you can have, a partner like Molly to just help you kind of get to where you want to go a little bit faster, definitely something to consider. And, for those that struggle with just what to focus on in terms of priorities, I wanted to mention, I'm going to have Molly's information in the links below, but I'll also, or the show notes, but I'm also going to put in there my free guide on how to focus on your priorities for those that struggle with balance, and a daily happiness formula, which is a 1-pager with instructions as to putting that happiness boost back in your day. So just wanted to mention those as well as resources. And I hope you all join us in our next episode of Wellbeing Works. Molly, thank you so much for being on the show. I super appreciate all of the insights, experience, and wisdom that you shared. And I really hope our guests can benefit from this. And as I've mentioned in other episodes, just remember, take one thing, go back, experiment with it. You can come back to these types of things later, but just focus on one thing and see what you can do with it. And so thank you again, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.